Hi, everyone. Welcome to the annual EarlyWell kickoff meeting for 2025. If you are joining us live right now, thank you for spending your lunchtime, your afternoon on what is hopefully going to be a snowy Friday with us. If you're joining after the fact, thank you so much for listening in. My name is Hannah Preston. I am the Health Policy Manager at NC Child, and I lead the EarlyWell Coalition. Today we have a lot to get through. We have a lot of moving parts since EarlyWell is such a dense coalition. So today it's going to run a little bit more like a webinar. Normally, some of our meetings are pretty interactive. But for today, if you could leave all questions and comments till the end, as we go through, if you have questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat, either to the general group or to myself. We also have Ariana Fahey, who is on running our slides, and she'll be able to troubleshoot any kind of technical assistance that you may need. Again, so all questions, comments, we will address at the end. We'll have a question and answer period, but sit back and relax. We have a lot of info to throw at you today. Next slide. So our mission, what is EarlyWell? Why are we here? So we want to influence bipartisan state level policy to strengthen the social emotional health for North Carolina's children ages prenatal to 8 and their families. So this is a statewide coalition. We have grown to almost 300 folks at this point. And so we are really focusing on that bipartisan state level policy. Next slide. So how are we funded? We have two main funders. Our largest funder is the Duke Endowment. So we originally got funding in 2019, and our funding through the Duke Endowment runs until 2027. They handle most of the parts of our work in terms of funding, and then the Arts Project, they help us with our family leaders, our outreach, and our stories work, and to allow us to do this work for a long time. Next slide. So as you go through, there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of meetings, a part of EarlyWell, but there are really a team of 3 of us that run this work. So as mentioned, my name is Hannah Preston. I lead the EarlyWell initiative, and I'm a part of NC Child. We then have Amy Allen, who oversees our family leaders. She's also on my team at NC Child. And then we have Kristen Davis. Kristen is a part of our partnership with the North Carolina Early Childhood Foundation. She's on in a contracted capacity to run our logistics. So our listserv is run by Kristen. Our meetings and some of our other just general outreach, it will be coming from Kristen. Next slide. Okay, a look back in time. It is crazy to think that it is 2025 and that we've been doing this for a couple of years. So wanted to take pressure because it looks different throughout its multiple phases. So as mentioned, we got this funding in 2019 from the Duke Endowment in partnership with the North Carolina Early Childhood Foundation. And it was built to enact recommendations for the Pathways for Grade Level Reading Actions Framework. And that is actually something that I can drop into this chat in case you have not read it before. So this report came out of the North Carolina Early Childhood Foundation and really act as the framework and backbone of this work. So our recommendations that we'll talk about in a little bit, this is where it initiated from. Our goals and level setting all stem from this recommendation list. Then in 2020, based on those recommendations, in partnership with the Family Support Network, a focus group, a study was conducted with 200 families from across the state to identify those needs of children even further. Of course, COVID hits in 2020. So the initial thought for this group is that we'd be in person and we'd be doing these quite often, and then the world shuts down. So then EarlyWell looks a bit different. And so really folks are starting to do focus groups that are more internal, starting to have conversations virtually and really seeing what that looks like for the needs of children and families. So 2021, there are these things called dance floors, which basically were focus groups with our experts. There were a lot of folks at the table who most or some of which are on today that are really ingrained in this work and have been doing this work for a long time to identify what do our policy recommendations look like? How do we tailor those to North Carolina? And so through that, there were different subject matters that were then grouped together. 2022, there's policy solutions that come from those focus groups. And so they originally had 90 policy recommendations, which feels like a ton. That's because it is. There was a lot of different options that were available based on that 200-person study of families, the Pathways for Grade Level Reading Framework, and those dance floors. That then got winnowed down to 30 policy recommendations. So then in 2023, folks are back in person. They host the first annual EarlyWell meeting in Chapel Hill. I think there was about 100 of us that were all there together, and 6 policy recommendations were unveiled that were supposed to be for the 2024-2025 years. Then end of 2023, beginning of 2024, leadership changes. So I came on and started leading this work in 2024. And so with those 6 policy recommendations, we went through to pretty much work with those organizations to see if these policies were still feasible in the state of North Carolina, if we had adequate data, what our politicians were saying downtown about some of this work. And so we workshopped them a little bit. One of the examples we have is the Family Support Network. Originally, we were asking for a $200,000 budget allocation, and we met with them and said, what are your needs? Does this still work? And so we've increased that to a $728,000 budget allocation based on the new needs of that organization. So we've changed those 6 policies down to 3 goals. 2 are policy related, 1 is community and practice based, but we'll get into that a little bit more. Also in 2024, we met monthly with those policy action teams. So we wanted to meet with everyone a bit more as the political landscape in North Carolina was changing, as new folks were coming on to really say, what are the needs of our folks today? And so we were doing policy meetings once a month that were open to the entire coalition to set more of a foundation, for folks that were coming and maybe not knowing about some of our recommendations. We were doing policy 101s, providing more education and support on those aspects. And we reframed one of our policies, which was on kinship care, which we'll talk about in a bit. And then we also welcomed on 11 family leaders. So this work originally started on the basis of family voice. And so we wanted to ensure at every step of this process, we continue to have family voice at the table. So we have paid volunteers who are a part of this group throughout the entire process that have lived experience, whether that's on specific policy recommendations, being parents, just across the board, having this kind of background has been so valuable to make sure that we are checking in not only with folks just in Raleigh, but folks across the state for the true needs of children and families today. Next slide. So as mentioned, we have those 11 family leaders. And so we originally had 3 for the last couple of years. And through increased funding from our Arch Grant funders and reworking some of our funding needs in general, we thought, let's bring people on from across the state that have different lived experience and different backgrounds. So we increased that number to 11, and it has been really great to learn from our folks and just be able to see that perspective as well. And then in terms of leadership, we also have our coordinating team. So our family leaders are paid, our coordinating team are unpaid volunteers who have taken up a 2-year term to act as our governing board. So the reason that most of these folks are taking an unpaid volunteer role is because some are from the state, some are in other organizational roles that really play a pivotal part in this work. So making sure that we have a pulse on if there's data that's coming out, if there's recommendations that are coming out, that we're all on the same page. And that's been really rewarding as well. So both of these leadership roles serve for a 2-year term, which will go until 2025, the end of this year. Next slide. Okay, 2024. I know I went into some of this, but we'll go a bit further. So this picture is actually from our in-person event that we had in October in Charlotte. And these are our family leaders, or most of them that were able to attend. And so 2024 was really a building year, knowing that we had new leadership, knowing that we had a lot of new faces. We wanted to make sure we were building a foundation to be able to go down to the legislature and making sure that we not only have adequate data to talk about the needs of children and families, but we also have stories and lived experience. So that was a big part of this year. So that's why we did these in-person events. As mentioned, we had those policy action team meetings that met virtually once a month, that new family leader cohort, and then our policy leadership at NC Child. So NC Child leads the policy work within EarlyWell. We met with those 6 leading organizations, again, to discuss political feasibility, data, lived experience. The meeting that we had at the Duke Endowment was the largest that we've had to date, with over 200 folks in attendance, which was amazing. To be able to be in Charlotte with our funders and to have so many folks together from different facets of this work was great. And we also started our lunch and learns. So lunch and learns will be quarterly, and they're open to the public. And there are different parts of policy or different parts of social emotional work. Last year, we did one on Medicaid and the tailored plan launch. We had folks from the Department of Health and Human Services come on and really had a panel discussion of what was this going to look like for children and families, where were some of the gaps, what questions did we have for them to answer. And then the other one, we had some of our friends from Utah come in. So they were able to talk about how they got some really awesome Medicaid legislation passed in their state. And so we were able to talk through and workshop what worked for them that we could also take to North Carolina. So we will have 4 lunch and learns this year, once a quarter. We don't know what those topics will be. So if there are topics that you all want or are interested in, please let us know. We like to have speakers. We like to have panels. We'll also do a deep dive on our legislature this year, since we are in a long session downtown, just for our folks who are not as aware of what's going on. We can catch you up to speed, give you all the tea and all the details on what's going on downtown to know how to follow everything that's there. Next slide. Okay, looking for 2025. So EarlyWell leads 3 policy goals, or 3 goals in general, that we'll be taking into 2025. And then we also have some ways that we will support. So this is a little bit different from last year, from folks that were a part of our 2024 EarlyWell Coalition, where we were really focused on those 3 EarlyWell-led policy priorities. And that was to make sure that we knew what we were leading and that it was tailored and really up to speed. And then this year we can say, okay, we know what we're leading, we know how that's going to look, but also how else can we support outside of that? So we have those 3 goals. The first one is in partnership with Reach Out and Read, and it is a $500,000 recurring state budget, state funding allotment to increase their efforts and the great work that they do. The next one is in support with Family Support Network. We are trying to ask for recurring state funding of $728,000. They currently are in 75 of the 100 counties, and that funding is to ensure that we can have them in all of the counties across the state. And then next, we had a lot of conversations through our policy action teams on kinship care, trying to see if a policy solution made sense, if work groups made sense. And we have folks who have lived experience from being certified kinship caregivers, unlicensed kinship caregivers, and we thought there's some gaps missing here. There's a level of storytelling that we want to hear from folks, and a level of lived experience that I don't think we've really honed in on more. So this year we'll be focusing on getting out into the community, talking about the lived experience of kinship care folks in the state, and also having folks come in to talk about what the possibilities are and what the supports are for folks going through that kinship care process. And then EarlyWell supporting projects. So as I said, we're going to be shifting a little bit to what is outside of these 3 supporting projects as well. And so one will be sign-on letters. So that way we can give you all tangible things to do. So when you look back, we can say, the EarlyWell Coalition has signed on and supported X, Y, and Z. And that will be state and federally. So as sign-on letters come on, if there's things that you think that we should be signing on to as a coalition, please send them to us. Especially knowing that we have a new administration coming on within the Department of Health and Human Services in North Carolina. There will be a lot of opportunity to provide our insight and our expertise in this way. And that's super general. I know it says sign on letters for any social emotional health policy, and that is so broad and that is intentional. Because we want to make sure that we have our footing in a lot of these different spaces this year. We'll also be adding more qualitative and quantitative data. So we have an amazing research team within NC Child, and they provide multiple different data options, some of which we'll be going over a lot more this year, but also pulling from other organizations that have data that supports this work. Because as we continue to move forward and refine our policies, we want to make sure that we have data that is up to date and that is just supportive of the work that we're doing. And then we're going to be supporting some other groups. So, we are not the only coalition out here doing this work. And a lot of us, I think, come in this work to reduce silos. And sometimes those happen regardless. So one of the big goals that I have is to make sure that we're overlapping and checking in with our other coalitions. And so this is just some here. This is by no means not the long list, but folks like Mind the Gap, the Perinatal Health Equity Collective, the Child Fatality Task Force, and the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, really just to make sure that we are all coming together and saying, okay, how can we work with one another to increase our policy priorities and make sure that we're prioritizing children and families in this state? Next slide. Okay, I mentioned data, so I wanted to make sure that I added some context we also I think this was just released, and so this is really for us to take a zoomed out approach of what does the landscape look like for children in North Carolina. And so we are going to make sure that when we go through this, that this is the data we're using as our backbone of the work. So this is on our website, and you can see it in the PDF format. You can also see it in this more user-friendly option. So we go through data by race and ethnicity, by number of live births. We also stratify this by some categories, including a strong start, family economic security, nurturing homes and communities, high quality education, health and wellness. And you can see this by year. So we go from 2018 all the way up to 2024. And a lot of this data comes from the pathways for grade level reading. And so knowing that that's our initial backbone, we then update these every year with that same data. So keeping in line with our initial goal from 2019, that data is still being used till today. So as we look through our 3 leading policies this year, as we make sure that those are successful, and as we look toward new policies in years to come, this data will act as that backbone so we can see what the needs are in the state. Next slide. Okay. And as we know, one of the big things we always talk about is that in order to make good policy, you've got to have 2 things. You've got to have really good data and you've got to have really good stories behind it. And so we know that storytelling is so important now more than ever when it comes to talking with our legislators and for just educating and informing folks. So it's one of the reasons we brought on our amazing family leaders, is to make sure we have that lived experience. But this year we want to take that one step further. And so we not only want to make sure that we're hearing from our folks that have done this work, we want to hear from some of our new folks. So we on our website have an EarlyWell storytelling submission option. So if you know, or someone you know is experiencing lived experience in any of these categories below, you can type in your story, you can record your story, and then it comes to us and we we'll have folks have different opportunities to share their stories. If all you want to do is submit a submission, that is amazing. But if you want to meet with us, and if you want to submit an op-ed that will live on the NC Child website, if you want to be featured in the EarlyWell listserv and our newsletter with your story, we can also do that. We're looking at the possibility of doing video stories and being a little bit more interactive and intentional on social media as well, because we know that word of mouth is so important when it comes to talking about this. So this is another way that you can get involved and that we'll be capitalizing on a lot more this year. So more to come exactly with what that will look like. But if you were interested on submitting these stories now, I can also drop that in the chat. Okay, so that lives on our EarlyWell homepage. If you go down to the very bottom, it'll say storytelling, and it'll take you right to this submission link. Next slide. Okay, I know I've talked a lot. We're going to get into a little bit of the bulk of our 3 policies. It is okay if you are coming to us and not knowing about any of these policies. It is okay if you're here because you want to learn about what's going on. Know that, come as you are, and we can educate and catch folks up to speed that need to. So this is a small refresh and just education on a little bit more about what those 3 policies are. We will have more educational pieces out as well. On our website, we have fact sheets for all 3 of these policies. We also have a Google Drive that goes even deeper into specific policies, dates, past history on some of this work. So if you really want to deep dive on all of this, don't worry, we have it all for you. But this is kind of a brief overview of those 3 policies, or those 3 goals. So the first one is kinship care. So kinship care in North Carolina, you can be a licensed or unlicensed kinship care provider, and that comes with different levels of support financially. And we have folks from across the state that are kinship care providers that have done such amazing work. And as mentioned before, we realize that there's a gap in education and just lived experience that needs to be shared. And so this year, we really want to be out in the community. We want to hear the lived experience. We want to know more about what the gaps are, because while getting licensed is great, not or don't want to. And so understanding more of why folks are making the choices they are, how can we support? And so on our website, we have a partner with us option. So if you are an organization or just someone who wants to provide a partnership in terms of in-person events when it comes to kinship care, please let us know. We are really interested to see what we can do in terms of partnerships with our county and local partners. So that's up there. This is our first year that we will be doing that in this way. We do know we're looking to do 2 medium scale events, probably this summer, one in the East, one in the West. What does that look like outside of that? I'm unsure. We know that at least that's our 2 kind of markers and pinpoints for this year. But we also want to do some smaller, more intimate events as well around kinship care. Next slide. Okay, so next we have the Family Support Network. So as mentioned, originally this policy started as a $200,000 policy ask. And when we asked, what is the ask going to be? What do you need from us? What's going on? What's the needs? So the Family Support Network has 11 hubs across the state that offers such incredible and valuable peer-to-peer supports for children and for families. And so knowing that they're in 75 of the 100 counties, we wanted to make sure that we could have them in every county. And so that's the policy this year. And so our staff at NC Child, our policy staff, will be working with Family Support Network to meet with some legislators and to also really talk about those stories, and having folks in the counties of some of our representatives and senators talking about how Family Support Network has been supportive to them. Next slide. Our next one is Reach Out and Read. So Reach Out and Read did a ton of great work and had a lot of great movement last year when it came to their budget ask. So Reach Out and Read was originally requesting a $500,000 recurring state funding to support statewide outreach. This was a policy that Reach Out and Read as an organization was funding, or that was supporting and running, and we were there in support of it. It's also very fun because our contract lobbyist is the same as Reach Out and Read, so it's been very fun to see the awesome work that they have been doing. So those are our three. Kinship, again, is one of our goals. It's not a policy right now, but it's more so one of our goals for our community engagement side of this work. Our family support network and Reach Out and Read goals are going to be hard policy asks. There will be community engagement components. As we said, great policy has data and storytelling combined. So there's a little bit of differential in those three, but those are the three that we are taking into 2025. Next slide. Okay, and then in terms of day-to-day, what this looks like, kind of the calendar overall, our meetings are already online to schedule out for the rest of the year. So that screenshot that you see, the orange, the purple, the green, or the blue and the gray, if you click on those, it will take you to the registration link for this meeting, for our action team meetings, and for our lunch and learns. They're scheduled out for the rest of 2025. All of our meetings are virtual because we have folks from across the state, most of which are recorded. So if you cannot make it, if you're joining us from the recording right now, hello, but just know that we record them all. And our policy action team meetings are recorded, but they're not shared as widespread as a meeting like this. So online, if you're wanting to watch this later, it will be on our YouTube, which is embedded in the EarlyWell NC-Child website. Our policy action teams are sent out differently just because we're talking about things that are a little bit more intimate and a little bit more personal. So we will send that out to folks who are registered to be a part of that team. If you're new and want to be a part of that policy action team, please send me an email. I will add you to that listserv and it will go out that way. Last year, we were in a legislative short session, and so a lot of our meetings went throughout the week. This is part of my job. It's not my whole job. Normally, if I'm not here, I will be downtown or doing other policy work. So we've had to shift our calendars a little bit. So now our meetings will be on Mondays or Fridays because normally Tuesday through Thursdays are busy days at the legislature since this is a legislative long session year. So we do those quarterly lunch and learns that will be virtual, quarterly or virtual monthly EarlyWell meetings. Originally, they were called policy action teams. We're still reworking if we're going to have just general meetings. We have a newsletter that comes out every other month as well. And then we have an in-person convening. The in-person convening is really to plan for the next year, look at the progress we've had, and also allow a little bit of educational components there. And it's just a great time to see everyone face to face, eat some good food, mix and mingle, have some great photo opportunities. So we don't have a date yet. Depending on location as well. Last year was at the Duke Endowment. We would love to be back there again. We're trying to make sure with schedules in the legislative calendar, what's most realistic. But we do know it will be in Q3 or Q4. News to come on what that will look like. We are going to try to send the date out as early as possible this year. So all of that will be there. Next slide. Where to watch. If you scroll all the way down at the end of our website, you will see this box. So it has our lunch and learns from last year. If you want to go and rewatch, that's where this video will be. All of our lunch and learns for the next year, all of them will be there. So if you ever want to look back or if you ever want to send these to folks, I would just send our website and have folks go down to the bottom of that link. Next slide. I see a question in the chat just asking how you can get on our newsletter. Thank you so much. Great timing. So we have a link to stay connected. I will also drop this into the chat. So anything that we have that needs to go to everybody will come out through this listserv. We also have a newsletter that will look at what we've been doing for the last couple of months, any kind of events that are coming up, any kind of data that's come out. that will all be sent to the listserv, which is sent from our NCECF partners. In terms of anything else policy related, if it's about our action teams, that will come from me. So that'll be an NC Child email. And then anything about community engagement or family leaders will most likely come from Amy Allen, so another NC Child email. The other thing that we are doing this year is a survey for who's missing from the table. Because in every conversation, I feel like folks always think, okay, this would be great if this person could have heard this conversation, or maybe I need to have this person be a part of this. We have a survey for that. Please use it. We want to make sure that we're growing. It is so amazing that we've grown from 200 to 300 folks in the last year. I'd love to grow that even further. So this is a way for folks to get connected. When you fill out this survey, there's an option for us to then have a one-on-one virtual conversation with folks. If they want to hear us or see us talk more about what we're doing, we'll have that option. If they also just want to be on a listserv or something like that, that's great too. That's also an option. But we want to make sure that new folks coming on are feeling welcomed and caught up to speed, because we know that EarlyWell has a lot of layers to it. So that is the listserv. Again, for anything like sharing meeting notes, sharing that registration, I would recommend just sending out the website link for EarlyWell, which I will resend now. A lot is embedded in that website, and I found that that is the most user-friendly way to send out all of our registration links and all of our surveys. Okay, that should be sent over now. And next slide. Okay, so we are gonna stop the recording. I talked a lot faster than I realized.